Hi, I'm Evan Sykamius, welcoming you back to episode 4 of Seeking Focus.
And now you're going to suck to get this money from me.
Welcome to Seeking Focus, a podcast that provides photographers and videographers with a place to critically compare technology, share ideas, and enhance their skills.
Hi Marty, how are you?
Hey dude, good. How are you doing today?
Yeah, not bad. How's your week?
Look, it's been actually really busy. It's other than photography and videography, I picked up a few clients, but my 98-year-old neighbor, he had his operation on his eyes, and he's had his cataracts removed, and so he's 98 years old, and he's obviously having a bit of a difficulty putting the eye drops in, and so I'll just go over there next door and just help him out. And so twice a day, just put some drops in. So, and the reason why I want to mention that is it's because, look, to be honest with you, he's actually said to me, he goes, he can see much better and he can see colors. So he actually didn't get this removed for the last 10 years. So he was living with his cataracts for 10 years. And he said to me, he goes, Marty, I can't see. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, I can actually see colors. I said, well, that's pretty, the world is beautiful. He goes, yeah, but I haven't seen colors like that for the last 10 years. And this guy's 98 years old. And I was just like, yeah, look, you know what? It's true. We take all this stuff for granted. So people that can see, we turn around to ourselves and we go, hey, we can actually see the sunsets, sunrises. We can see all that. So, yeah, look, other than that, that kind of moved me a little bit, I think, as well, because, this guy's 98 years old. He lived through the World War II, and he served in the US forces. He's actually Polish as well, so that's why he comes to me all the time. And, I'll help him out. He gives me a lot of cool stories from the old days, and yeah, really cool bloke. So other than that, not much. What about you, man?
It's been a sad week for me, actually. I've attended a number of funerals, close friends, and family as well. And I was also asked to video record a funeral. So the ceremony, the church, and then the burial itself. And I generally don't do those types of shoots. But this time around, being that it was actually a close friend, I couldn't say no. And I think one of the reasons I don't do them is because I'm a very emotional person. And,
You get like that with the older age, I think.
Yeah, I'm getting old and I think about my own mortality. But they're the moving experiences. And, at the end of the day, I actually feel quite saddened whenever I go to funerals, and I try not to do that. And going to random strangers' funerals, I'd still feel, even though I don't know the person, I'd still feel quite sad. But an interesting thing did happen at the funeral. They had a live streamer because during COVID and all the restrictions, people can't come from overseas. So they're live streaming these events. And so we're also doing it at weddings, civil celebrants and doing their streaming. Funerals are doing it. So people overseas who can't come to Australia for the funeral can still have the opportunity to see what's going on, and it's a great opportunity. It's a good business thing to do, and it's also it's interesting. It's I've done live streaming. It's probably not something that I would be doing in those types of cases, but what caught my attention at one of the funerals was the live streaming was done by a person who didn't have any cameras. He had phones. And they're all mounted on little moving motors, and he controlled all of them. The setup itself was actually very, very flimsy. Not like if I was doing something like that, I'd have the high quality cameras, the high quality tripods, the high quality this, that, the other. And he had none of that. But the actual production was extremely good. And it sort of reminded me that we don't need to have expensive equipment to be able to produce good quality products. And not everyone wants a Hollywood camera. A cheap quality camera can actually do the job. One of the things that actually had me interested and caught my attention the most about this live streamer was, when you have a tripod, you have the plate that fits onto the tripod and then connects to the camera. So base plates, whatever they're called.
Yeah.
He had actually made his own out of wood. So I know it's funny, like I was sitting there looking at it like, what in the world is, and then of course I started wondering what type of wood he was using. But he was creative enough and he made base plates that would actually hold the cameras that he was using. And it was, I've never seen anything quite like it. So kudos to him. It was... I'm
not too sure how reliable would that be for long term. Well,
it depends on the type of wood. If it's hardwood or balsa wood. But it was interesting to see. And like I said, at the end of the day, you don't need to have super expensive equipment to do a job.
Yeah, true.
So, that was pretty much my week.
You're going to need the experience, I guess, a bit more, and you can do the job. No worries.
Yeah,
that's great, man. That's a good feel good story in a way, because sometimes you can't afford everything, and it's a good idea to jump in and obviously use whatever you've got and what's available. So that's really good. So,
definitely. Yeah.
Hey, what are we talking about this week, man?
Well, this week's episode is actually based on something that happened. I received a call earlier in the week from a fellow photographer, reasonably new to the industry, and he was having a few problems where basically he had made a contract, he thought he had made a contract with a client, and then he'd finished the project off and the client refused to pay. Okay. So I figured it's probably an important thing to discuss, basically knowing your client, developing contracts, and then if things don't go properly, what do you do from that point? How can you...
It's frustrating.
Yeah, because if you've spent hours upon hours, filming, driving around, editing, and then you send it to the client and they bum you around, it's not only frustrating, but it also, it makes you feel like crap on the inside. So that's why I thought this episode we should be concentrating on. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, man. I think to be obviously agreeing with you 100%, and I think we all have been there and we've done that. And look, I've been doing this for obviously a while as well, so there's been a fair share of people that turn around and obviously don't want to have anything to do with you afterwards, even though you produced pretty good outcome, and sometimes they can't give you a reason why, but yeah, look, totally agree. And do you know if his contract was verbal? Was it signed contract? Do you know what kind of contract did he do?
Well, it was a mixture of a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But you can actually have a written contract which is actually not valid at all. It's completely void. And that's a few of the things that I want to actually get into today. What I'll start off with first of all is getting to know your client. Now, a couple of key points that I think are very, very important to realize is there's different types of clients. You got your corporate clients, you got your personal clients, you got your non-profit clients. They all vary. And, at the end of the day, sometimes you'll find a client who'll basically say, how much is this job? And you'll say, it's this amount of money. And they will say, yep, not a problem. And that's it. That's the end of the conversation. Generally, what I've experienced, and this is not across the board for everyone, obviously, but this is my own personal experiences, the clients who don't argue with you are basically the ones who aren't going to bum you around at the end. They're going to be happy with what you produced and leave it at that.
Yeah. The
clients who sit there basically arguing and trying to lower the price and every single cent, they're trying to bring down every single cent. You've experienced those people, haven't you?
Mate, all the time.
You give them a reasonable rate and they're like, but how about if you...
The thing is, what's reasonable rate these days, because everyone sort of charges, from, $20 or $10 an hour pretty much, Australian dollars we're talking about, to, $200, $300, $400, $500 an hour, you know what I mean? And I guess you got to sort of weigh up and down what's worth what, right? So... yeah, it's basically, I guess, from my perspective, I don't rock up to a client site now and charge him $100. You know what I mean? To me, that's just number one. You got to obviously jump into the car. So I guess from my perspective, and you're probably very similar because you got a fair bit of gear that you bring with you as well, right? But for me to be able to do a proper shoot, it takes me an hour just to get everything organized, batteries charged, make sure that everything is ready for me to put in the car to be able to take that gear to the shoot.
Yeah, definitely. And the clients who are sitting there arguing with you for every cent, don't think about all those little things
That's
that you
exactly
do.
right.
You know, and we'll get into pricing in a moment, but I just wanted to sort of say that be wary of the client who sits there arguing about every single cent and trying to bargain you down, because my experience with those clients is they will turn around at a later date and complain or not be happy. And that's pretty much what actually happened to my associate. And then, of course, you've got the non-profit people or people who just can't afford what you're offering. And, you know, and with those people, you sort of try and help them out as much as you can. They're not doing it because they're scungy. They're doing it because they just can't afford it. You know, and you got to take that into account. But once again, back to the clients who continuously hassle you for every cent. They're the ones who are going to put you through hell. They're the ones who aren't going to pay. They're the ones who are going to be standing over your shoulders. And in the instances where I have a client like that, I'm not rude to them. I just turn around and tell them the truth. I'm sorry, but that is the price. Now, if you're not happy with that, there are other people out there who will do the same job as me, possibly even better. But unfortunately, that's not me, and I wish you all the best with finding someone. And that's it. I'll leave it at that.
Agree. Yeah.
And you know, a lot of the times they come back and they say, "Oh, I'll pay for it now." Well, that's up to you to decide if you want to progress. If they haven't flustered, made you so angry and flustered
I
that
would have charged them 80% deposit, man. For
yeah, well, deposit's another thing. All right, so you mentioned it before, pricing. How do we work our pricing? So your pricing is different to mine.
It is. I think it is. Well, yeah. But I'm not too sure if we should give numbers just yet.
No. There is no numbers.
Yeah.
Like
So look, for my production, it's so I'll walk you through more or less what my production component is. So like I said, night before I set up all the gear, right? Make sure that batteries are charged, make sure the cameras are all set up. Normally take 2 or 3 cameras onto a shoot, right? And basically it takes me over an hour to put everything into my Pelican case. It takes me over an hour to charge all the batteries, charge all the lights, charge everything. So that's just an hour, right? That's for that specific client. So after that, you got to put everything into the car. You got to drive to your client's site, right? So you already wasted, probably close to an hour and a half to 2 hours getting to the site, unloading, moving things. Then it takes an hour to set up because we've got obviously microphones, we've got lights, we've got cameras, and everything goes onto, obviously it's got to be steady and stable. So make sure that, we don't knock anything, set up everything. So from that perspective, that's already 2 to 3 hours of actual work, right? Then you've got your expenses like, CityLink. So if you're driving through tollways or whatever else, that's extra on top. Then if you got your parking, that's always on top again. So before you even start pressing the record button on the camera, you're already down 3 to 4 hours.
And all the money associated with it.
Correct.
Yeah. And
so to me, that that's already half a day. So normally, what I would do is I would charge client for at least half a day's of work, and I think that's pretty fair considering what it is. So 4 hours of work, I think that's and then usually the quick shoots take about 2 to 3 hours. So that's that's pretty much all day shoot already. I'm not being, a prick or anything about it, but I do obviously have my minimum charge, you know what I mean? So my minimum charge is 2 hours, and most of the clients, I actually tell them it's actually 4 hours just for the fact that I do have to get all the gear ready and everything else, So when I shot my, I picked up a new client this week, like I said at the beginning, and I took all my gear to him. He was a dentist, so we actually took a couple of macro shots and other things. He saw all my gear. He's like, mate, you got to come back again. This is so cool. You know what I mean? So, but you know what? It's impressed him, and obviously, hopefully, he will come back to me again. But yeah, what about you? What about you? So do you...
Same. Yeah. But the thing is, what I've done is I've worked out for me to charge, I've worked out how much it costs me per hour to be able to do videography or photography. And what you need to factor in, a lot of people, if it's a hobby and you're starting off, you're not going to do this. This is a step for the type of person who does this on an ongoing basis or on a professional level. You need to factor in every single one of your costs, and you would not believe how many costs there are. And you've got to spread it out over an entire year and then work out how many jobs you can get during that year, subdivide it, and you can work out your figures. So you mentioned it earlier, travel costs. So you got your fuel, your tolls, insurance. wear and tear on the vehicle, the cost of the vehicle. It just keeps going on. Tires, servicing, your time. Time's a big factor as well. Okay, so then we walk across to office expenses, because let's be honest, you're not producing the photos and the video editing out in the street. You're doing it in an office, right? So you got the rent, you got the internet expenses, you got electricity, stationery, blah 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 blah, goes on.
Not mentioning pricing for Photoshop and all the other sort of software that we have to purchase.
Yeah, exactly, and and your computers as well. And I mean, I don't know about you, I've got 3 computers that I use. A laptop and two PCs. Yeah. So so you've got that. Then if you have staff who are also helping you out, they also have to be factored into it.
They have to get paid.
Yeah. Your camera equipment. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
Okay. That has to be, because there's a lifespan on cameras.
No, that's right.
We were speaking about it in an earlier episode about the actuation of a mirrored camera.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And your lifespan of your camera has to be spread out across a period, and you've got to.
And let's face it as well. I mean, our cameras are not $500 cameras. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Our cameras, my 5D. Sorry, that's my Canon. My Sony A7S III. I mean, which is primarily.
You're never going to forget that Canon.
Which is primarily my video camera that I took to all the shoots now. That's a $6,000 camera, and that's just body alone. Now we got $3,500 for the lens. Mm-hmm. Then we've got...
That's just for one lens. How many do you take along?
Well, that's exactly right. Because, I mean, if you're shooting, obviously, portraits or someone talking, you take a 50mm or 85mm, and then you've got your wide-angle lenses. So, look, just one lens is $3,500. Then you've got your matte box that we talked about this episode as well. My matte box is actually $1,300, you know what I mean? And it's top quality. Then you've got your Atomos, which is your external monitor to show your so that's all adding value to the end of the actual
tripods, gimbals, lights, sound systems, cables.
People don't realize how much gear we actually have to bring with us and how much effort actually goes into it.
I would like to just show up with a small little handy cam. Like the old days. iPhone, yeah. I actually did go to an event where someone showed up with an iPhone to record. It was a wedding. Oh, yeah. I can tell you that did not go down well. So maybe a story for another episode. But anyway, but I think the biggest cost that no one really factors in. Okay, and I'm sure you're in the same boat as me. We're both family people. We have children, we have wives. Not everyone has that, but we do. It's the cost of not being with your family. Yeah. And look, sometimes, it is nice to get away from them, but for the most part, I mean, I need to justify, if I'm doing a shoot, what's it worth to me? It's not only the equipment and the expenses, but it's also the time away from my kids. What are my kids doing when I'm not there? And on the worst case scenario, if you've got young children, you've got to have babysitters, that's an additional cost. So, you've got to factor all that in. Yeah. So the magic number, do you have a magic number? I've got a magic number. Have you got a magic number? There is no magic number. It's a magic number for you. Yeah. Each person will be different. Like the person who showed up with the iPhone at the wedding, I'm sure he's not going to charge $1,000 per shoot. So when people ask you, what should I charge? You need to say to them, sit down, do the calculations, work out what you're spending.
And every single person will be different as well. I mean, it's when you rock up with a Blackmagic that's worth $10,000 or $5,000 compared to just a normal crappy Canon. But like you can't charge obviously $1,000 if you just bring a camera and maybe one light. You know what I mean? When I bring, obviously, microphones, when I bring lights, when I bring cameras, multiple cameras, when I, hire additional maybe locations or whatever else that we need to go through, it's...
Actually, sorry, I'm going to cut you there for a second. There is one other factor that I actually went over my head and I didn't think about it. Your expertise.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
How do you put a figure on expertise?
Yeah. It's true, mate, because... comparing that, for instance, the other day I purchased a smart switch from Bunnings, and I wanted to connect it to my. I'm pretty electrically savvy, you know what I mean. So in Bunnings, you buy a switch, and you go, oh yeah, I can kind of put that in myself, no problem, easy. I kind of looked at it and I go, crap, I don't know how to do this, you know what I mean. So I rang up my Sparky, that helped me out. He's a mate of mine, and I said, hey Nick, can you come down to help me out with the switch? He goes, yeah, no worries, man. I'll come down, no worries. I said, how much do you charge? He goes, mate, for you? For nothing, man. It's all good, bro. And I was like, you know what? Nah, man, like you have to charge me, man. Like simple as that. It's your expertise to connect that switch. So exactly the same in our factor, you know what I mean? It's our expertise to be able to record the video. It's our expertise to edit that video and obviously change whatever we need to change accordingly to make sure that all looks fantastically well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so from a Sparky perspective or from a videography perspective, you know, he's got the expertise to connect that blue, yellow, whatever wire together to make it work.
To make sure your house doesn't burn down.
That's exactly right, you know what I mean? And just exactly the same thing, you know, we're probably not dealing with the house fires as such, like this guy would, but, you know, we are still dealing with, obviously...
People's memories.
Yeah.
Just as important.
Well, that's true, isn't it? I mean, you know, these days, picture tells 1,000 words, but video tells a million.
All right, so moving right along, making contracts. Now, when you're writing up a contract, there's a couple of things you need to be aware of. First of all, is the person who's actually making the contract with you, first of all, of legal age? So I can't go off and start a contract with a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old. They have to be at a certain age, there you go, being 18, to be able to go into a contract. So a 16-year-old cannot contract me to do a video production. So if I went off and made a contract, I did the work for them and gave them the final video and they said, see you later, and that was it, well, whose fault's that?
Yeah, well, you can't do anything about it.
You can't do anything about that, you know. And also, for example, if you're making a contract with someone, you need to make sure the person's got authority to be able to contract you. Now, I actually experienced that firsthand. A while ago, I actually did a photo shoot for a telecommunications company, a very large one for that matter. So I was called into a business centre and I was told that basically they wanted me to do a whole staff profile, blah, blah, blah. It was for some type of competition. Now, the person who brought me in was the manager, but he did not have authority to basically make this purchase or this contract with me. Okay. Because the competition they were entering was actually meant to be just an in-store thing, mobile phone, not bring in a professional and charge it onto their accounts. So what happened was I basically did the shoot. I sent them the invoice and they're like, yeah, no worries, you know. Didn't try to bargain me down, which was actually for me, was like, oh, cool, you know, reputable place. They want that. They want this job. They're not arguing about the price. Excellent. There's nothing to worry about.
Good. Yeah.
Problem was, of course, that he then discovered that he didn't have an allowance to be able to hire someone, and he just went quiet. I did not hear a word from him. So
you supplied the photos?
Supplied the photos, made the edits, everything that he wanted. He submitted them. Did not hear back from him when I sent him the...
That's a rookie mistake, isn't it, in a way?
Well, yes and no. I mean, how do you know? How do you know that when you're making a contract, do you say to them, oh, sorry, what authority have you? Let me see your authority. You don't.
Normally you wouldn't give them the final images or the final product, right? And you did.
Well, I do. And this is one of those things that you also need to decide on. When do you give them the final product? Yeah. Do you give it to them before you get paid or after you get paid? That's one of those decisions you need to make. And we'll talk about that later on. But what ended up happening with him was he just wouldn't pay. He wouldn't respond to emails. He wouldn't do anything. And he left me in a lurch. I did get my money back in the end, and we'll talk about that later in the show, about when we talk about how do you get your money back or how do you actually go about getting money from people who owe you money. Yeah. But yeah, that was a prime example of someone who did not have the authority to make a contract, and it's difficult to know. I mean, a manager of a business centre rings you up and says, "I need this done."
Oh, well, you trust him that,
you know. Exactly. Yeah. So things like that do happen, and no matter how many things, you try your best. All right, so then you've got your invoices and your receipts. So a quote is basically when you're telling the person, this is how much it's going to cost. Right? And then you provide them a receipt at the end or an invoice telling them this is how much it is, this is how much you owe me. So initially it's more of an initial discussion contract sort of thing, and then this is the final bill, pay me the money.
Yeah, that's right. Tax invoice.
Yeah, tax invoice. And then you need to put down in that contract terms of the contract. So what will you be doing? You know, what specifically? What will you be supplying? But also, you also have to list the things that you won't be supplying. Have you ever considered that one?
No, I guess not. I think most of my things are, I normally automate my invoicing, right? So basically when I go to a client site, I tell them I'm going to bring 2 cameras, I'm going to bring microphones, I'm going to bring lights, and potentially depending what kind of shoot it is, if I bring my gimbal or my sliders or whatever else is required for the job, I itemize them on the actual quotation. So if it's not on the quote, so like a lot of clients come to me, can you bring a teleprompter? So yeah, sure, no worries. That's going to be an additional cost. You know what I mean? But I don't say that on the actual quote itself. So I asked them, I said, what kind of shoot are we doing? Are we talking directly to the camera? Are we talking off the camera? Or depending on what's required, I tell them, hey, I'm going to bring a teleprompter and that's going to be additional cost. So in the past was a client asked me for a teleprompter, for instance, and I said, okay, I don't actually have one. I have to hire one. And that was the actual cost that I was adding on to that invoice itself. So yeah, I itemize all my invoicing and tell people what I'm going to bring and what I'm not going to bring. And I also, I guess I put my time in there as well. So the time of the shoot, it will be 2 hours. And I try to stick to that. I mean, look, if it goes over 15, 20 minutes, big deal. You know, we have fun, you know, whatever. I try to have fun on my shoots. So that's why if it goes a little bit longer, oh, well, bad luck. You know what I mean? I'll suck it up. But yeah.
Well, the reason I was mentioning that is because, like, sometimes I've done a shoot and they've said to me, we just want the raw photos or we want the raw video. And you go, yeah, no worries. And you do the contract and you sign it up and you say, 2 hours of video recording or 2 hours of photography. But you forget to mention there will be no editing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the stuff that you don't say is just as important as the stuff you do say.
Yeah.
And you need to really spell out details, because some people will turn around and say, well, that was expected. That's normal for a photographer. The last guy did it.
Yeah.
So if you haven't said in there, this will not be supplied.
And it's very true. I've actually spoke to one of the other guys that owns a fairly big studio as well, and I'll work with him more or less. And we actually we quoted a big job actually, and I said to Daniel, I said, hey Dan, what do you want me to do? He goes, you know what? Write it down like you're talking to a 5-year-old.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And that's really,
add
really
this,
important.
add that, and make sure you explain yourself. I mean, sometimes those quotations can be 2 pages long. You know what I mean? My terms and conditions is just 1 full page of terms and conditions on the bottom. You know
Yeah, exactly. And like, for example, some people think that you're going to be coming with 2 cameras because you're going to get 2 camera angles, but this has never been discussed.
No,
and you just say videography, So in their head, they're thinking, 2
and that's
cameras.
exactly one of the reasons why I put on my quotation, say 1 camera or 2 cameras, you know what I mean? And specifically say, you know what I mean? But yeah, you do have to be very vigilant and very, very careful of the words that you do use. So definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. And remember, if you're not going to do something, say it. So that's clear from the beginning and there's no arguments down the track. And, then you've got a contract there that you can actually say, well, here it is, and you sign this. All right, so we'll move on to the conditions of an invoice and also for a quote. Now, when I quote people, I actually put a number of conditions at the bottom. I write them so small that they can't read them.
Bumhole.
See this line here? That's just a blur. You can't read it unless you've got a magnifying glass. But no. So don't do that, because they have to be able to read it, because they can use that against you. But anyway, and by the way, what we're saying to you now is not legal advice. So if you follow what we're telling you and something bad happens, it's not our fault.
That's what we do, and I mean, we speak from experience as well. So yes,
it's what works for us.
Yeah, what works for us.
And you need to sculpt everything that we say to you to suit your own needs. Obviously, one style doesn't suit all. And what we're talking about today works for me, works for you, and it works for most people, to be quite honest. But you need to, if you're not sure, if you're doing a legal document, speaking to a lawyer is always really good.
Yeah.
But I
think you got to have experience in it as well. When you're starting off as well, or you've been doing this for a long time, you know what's required and you've made those mistakes.
Yeah, and
everyone makes mistakes.
But you usually learn
correct
after you've been screwed over.
Once or twice.
Yeah, exactly. And you sort of go, okay, I'm gonna put conditions on there.
Yeah.
All right. So with my quotes, I have a number of conditions. Please feel free to add to them as I go along. So the first part on my quotes that I do is I provide a period that the actual quote is valid for. So I will say this quote is valid for 6 weeks, 3 months, whatever the period that you feel comfortable with. And the reason I do that is because prices change from day to day. You might have to buy new equipment. The price might go up, it might go down. You might need to travel further. Prices change all the time, right? So if I quote a job now and I quote it 3 years from now, it's going to be a different price.
100%.
Yeah. So you need to put a date in there. It basically says this is how long it's going to last, and so they can't turn around 3 years from now and go, we had a contract, because that's important. Also, a lot of people say deposits. I choose to use the word retainer. Now, basically, when you're signing a contract or you're basically offering to do a service to a person, you need to say, well, this is how much money you need to pay me to hold that date open for you. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, if you basically book out a date and that person changes their mind, you've lost a whole day. If it was a whole day shoot, which you could have given to someone else, so you've lost money.
Especially with COVID now and everything else, you have to negotiate all that stuff as well.
Yeah,
you need to be flexible.
I think to some degree you need to have some flexibility. You can't be stringent. Like in COVID, for example, with a lot of my contracts, I turned around and I said, you know what, this is not because you're a bonehead or you've changed your mind or something along those lines. It's something that was out of your control. Okay, fair enough. I'm happy to cancel the contract, give you everything back, including the retainer/deposit. A lot of people don't do that. They're like, well, too bad, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. Once again, personal choice.
And how many of those clients actually do pay that deposit?
All of my clients.
Yeah. So you wouldn't turn up to a shoot even if there was...
If it's a regular client who I have regular work with and I've never had a problem with, generally sometimes might, turn a blind eye to them. But for the most part, I actually do insist on it because even regular clients can become nightmarish at times.
And that's how I've been burned in the past as well, you know what I mean? So, yeah, definitely, 100%.
Yeah, and that's happened to me as well. Someone that I've been working for several years, overnight became a complete pain. We'll talk about that one later. All right, so
it sounds like this episode is going to be for like 2 hours or something.
Yeah, me complaining about things, but your deposit or your retainer amount, that also you need to determine the amount. So I originally started with a 10% deposit, which the reality behind it wasn't enough to cover anything. Went up to 25, discovering that's not really working for me, and now I'm at 50. So I'm actually getting a 50% retainer, non-refundable. So if you change your mind or something happens, too bad. I've lost my day and I can't book it in. Then I also have, when the remainder of the actual amount will be paid. So before I give you the photos, will you pay me the full amount minus the retainer and deposit, or will it be afterwards? All right, so that is something that is a personal choice with me, with my clients. If I know the client well, I'll let them have a few weeks to pay afterwards. I don't have a problem with that. But there are other clients out there who, if you don't get the money up front, you'll never see it. And then you're going to go through legal issues and yada, yada, yada. All right, so cancellation periods. Now, this is a big thing, right? Because, look, stuff happens. People are getting married. Suddenly the wedding's not going ahead. And they're like, they've sent you a whole bunch of money, Is it fair to sort of say, well, sorry, you can't have any of it back?
That'd be reasonable, I think.
Yeah. So if you've got terms where they have to pay you up front before you actually do the job, I actually provide a period where, if it's within a week or 2 weeks before the date, fair enough, I'll give you back the remainder of the money. The retainer doesn't change that. But if it's like 10 hours before the event and you tell me 10 hours before the event, you're not getting a cent back.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I've lost the entire day. I can't even redeem it. No one's going to ring me up at 12 o'clock at night and say, hey, can I get a shoot tomorrow morning? I think that's never happened to me. Has it ever happened to you?
No, it hasn't.
Yeah. No. Okay. And that's unfair to you as a business person. Also, transfer dates. So if someone does, like something changes, like the wedding date changes, can they transfer it? This is something that you need to say, well, if you want to transfer the date, you need to give me a bit of notice, blah, blah. And that's, once again, your terms. Quotation is based on the client's information provided. Now, this is a little line that I put in there because at the end because I base my quotes on what the client said to me. If they change their mind and they say, oh, no, I didn't say that. Well, yeah, you did. That follows on with the correctness of the information. So there's another line in there that says that all the information in this contract or, this invoice or this quote is correct because you've signed off on it and you've paid the money.
Yeah.
By doing that, you've agreed that everything that's written there is basically legitimate.
Yep.
So you can't turn around a later day and go, I didn't say that. No, I didn't see that. That was a mistake. Yeah, I didn't realise. It's too bad. That's your responsibility. The last thing I actually put on my quotes, and I don't think you've done this before, but this is an interesting one. I've done all-day shoots, right, and you don't get a break. You don't get food, you don't get drink. They expect you to work like a slave. So I actually have a requirement now in all my quotes that after 5 hours, anyone who's working on set from my company has to have a break, and the food is supplied and the drink is supplied by the actual client.
Boom, bitches.
Because look, and earlier on in life, I used to do weddings. So you'd rock up to a wedding, and weddings can go for 12, 13 hours.
I've done those before, yeah.
Yeah, look, I try to avoid them as much as possible unless I know the client. But 12 hours without a drink and food, you can't.
Yeah.
You know, you start feeling like you're going to pass out. Yeah. You know, it's detrimental.
That's one of the reasons why I don't do weddings anymore, man.
Yeah, and that's why my contract says that if I'm doing more than 5 hours, sorry, you've got to buy me a meal.
Yeah.
You know, you got to buy me a drink.
Yeah.
Buy me a drink, baby. But like if you're traveling interstate, for example, you know, I'm stuck on, I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, drive to the airport, drop off my car, get chauffeured into the actual airport, catch a plane, land in whatever state I'm in, travel to the, you know, by the time I've done that and gone back home, you're looking 8-9 hours.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know.
And we've done those before as well. I mean, I had Sydney shoots, you know, for 3 days, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm sure you've been to Brisbane and you've been to Sydney in the past. So we all know how it feels, man. And you know what? The thing is as well about shoots, how I feel anyway. Look, I walk into a shoot and straight away is not just physically working, but you're mentally working as well. So you're working both mentally and physically hardcore. And that, to me, like after a day's shoot, I get home, my wife says to me, "Are you all right?" I go, "I'm going to bed now. Good night." You know? So I just literally drop dead after that. It's just, to me, working for such a long time, mentally and physically, it's just draining. Simple as that. And people don't understand that because, they look at that and they go, "Hey, this is fun for you. This is, you're doing this for fun." Well, yeah, I enjoy doing it.
I've heard that one before.
Yeah.
You're doing this for fun. It's like, no, I'm paying the bills at home and putting food on the table.
I'm working, you know what I mean? It's not, you know, I enjoy camera gear and I enjoy, you know, flying my drones and I enjoy it. But am I actually doing it for a client? Then, hey, I'm expecting to get paid because I'm working physically, I'm working mentally, and then I've got, you know, probably 2 to 3 days post-production work as well. So people don't understand that. And that's, you know, you have to, it's potentially our job to tell them what you're going to be doing for them for that amount of money.
Yep.
So, yeah.
It's a hard one. All right.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
All right. So moving on to the last bit that I wanted to talk about, dealing with clients who just don't want to pay you. Now, I'm going to let you hear an audio recording that was actually sent to me by my friend. We discussed this earlier about who he had done the work and the client refused to pay him. And we also played a small smidgen of it right at the beginning of the show, at the intro. So let's just have a quick listen and come back.
Can you please call me ASAP because you're making a big drama about this payment when you haven't done the thing that you needed to do. You call me and don't think that the message you sent or the email had threatened me. I don't care. You want to send me to VCAT? I can also go to VCAT. And now you're going to suck to get this money from me. Thank you. Bye.
The history or the story behind it is that basically he did a job for a client who kept screwing him over for, it must be cheaper. More cheaper.
Everything would be cheaper,
yeah. Yeah, everything had to be cheaper. And, you know, so basically he kept lowering his price and he kept lowering it. And he was telling me about it. And I said to him, you shouldn't do that, you know, because basically these are the types of people who are just going to cause you issues down the track. And it ended up coming true. And I hate saying that I was right, but I was right. So he finished the job off, did a massive shoot for this person, sent them the finals. And
without obviously getting deposits or payment or anything like that.
Nothing. And he heard nothing back from him. And he's like, you know, he's saying to me, he rang me up and he said, what should I do now? You know, like they're not responding. And we're not talking, you know,
What's the time frame here?
We're talking 3 weeks.
Okay.
He hasn't heard back from him in 3 weeks.
Mm.
So he finally actually managed to get him on the phone. I said to him, keep calling, you'll eventually get through.
Mm.
So he actually kept calling, and he did get through. Now, I think she might have picked up the phone by accident. I don't know. But he had a discussion and said, look, it's been 3 weeks. I need my money. And she said, I'll pay you. And he said, when do you think you'll pay me? She said, in about 3 months. All right. And
Yeah.
so basically afterwards, he messaged me and he said, what should I do? I said, well, 3 months is kind of ridiculous after you've been waiting such a long period already.
Yeah.
What would you like to do? He said, I want my money. I said, that's fair enough. So why don't you send her an email saying, look, then, at this time, I can't really wait that long. It's unfair. It's unreasonable. I'd like my money. And he sent the email and there was no response. And I said, send another one as a follow-up, So he sent about 3 or 4 emails. No response to any of them. And we know the email address was correct because she had been communicating with him via email.
Yeah.
And then he finally said she's not going to pay him. We're talking a very lengthy period by this stage, which it was frustrating even for me, and it wasn't even my client. And he basically said, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to have to accept that I've lost the money. I said, well, no, hang on a sec. There's a number of different things you can do. And we'll talk about those in a moment, the different steps that you can take. But the worst case scenario step is taking it to VCAT, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, I believe it is. Yeah. Worst case scenario, you try and work your way around it. But anyway, so I said, look, just send her an email saying that, look, I've waited long enough. It's unrealistic. If you don't pay within a set period and actually give a period, I'm going to basically take this to VCAT.
Mm. Take it further. Yeah. And VCAT was basically further. He got that voice recording on his phone within an hour after sending that email. Right. And can I just say that voicemail, that's just pure abuse. That's to me, like if I got that, I would be fuming. Do you know what I mean? Because the way I look at it, I haven't done anything wrong here. I've supplied them out of good faith with final images. Business is business at the end of the day. You know what I mean? This is my bread and butter. So if she was my client, I would have taken her to the cleaners big time. Yeah.
And hopefully you can resolve matters before it gets to that level, But look, in the first instance, I think what the most important part is when you do come across a client who's not willing to pay you or is not responding, try and make contact several times by telephone, by email, and try and mix it up a bit because they could turn around and say, oh, well, I never received that email or I never got the phone call.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but how about the email that I sent you or the phone call I made? And we're not talking about one phone call or one email. And look, in all honesty, sending an email or making a phone call like that and, wanting your money is difficult. Most people don't feel comfortable doing it, and that's fair enough. But you know what? It is your right. You own that. It's owed to you. You did your part. So you need to ask for it. And in doing it, don't be abusive. Don't be aggro on the phone.
Yeah.
Don't swear. Don't do anything. And at the end of the day, if you do everything right and the person's not responding, then you have no choice but to, the next step would be to consider bringing in debt collectors.
Yeah, which was a crappy thing to do, isn't it?
It is a crappy thing. But you know what? I mean, sometimes not being paid is a crappy thing. Especially if you put a lot of effort into it.
You know what? This goes on a lot too. You know what I mean? I know, like I mentioned in this episode, like I've got a couple of mates that are Sparkies and everything else, and it unfortunately it goes around in every type of business. And we're all trying to make a living. We're all trying to make sure that we feed our family, we pay the bills, and we do the right thing at the end of the day. And I'm just, just hearing this sort of stuff, it's just so frustrating me, I mean.
You sound frustrated. It wasn't even your client.
No, that's exactly right. And, I mean, I've put up with this sort of crap as well in the past, you know what I mean? And I mean, there's good things come out of it as well. And then there's, it's just frustrating. And stress levels gone through the roof. I've noticed myself, if my stress levels go through the roof, my back starts to ache, and my head starts to ache, and the whole thing is just you almost got to turn around and you go forget about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I've still got a client that owes me $500 from 8 months ago. He doesn't want to pay me. And what am I supposed to do? Take it to the VCAT? I'm just like, you know what? Stuff him. I had enough. I don't want to think about it anymore. He wants to pay, that's fine. He's going to get the finals. He still hasn't got the finals. He knows what he's got, but he still hasn't got the finals.
But that's the thing. So you actually haven't given him the finals. But if you had given him the finals, then you'd be in a very different boat.
Oh, that's right.
You know, and you can go off and use those finals now for whatever you want, and you can make money off those. So fair enough. That's understandable.
Put them on stock libraries.
Yeah, why not? It's actually your photos.
Right.
You own them, unless it's a wedding, in which case then the actual client owns the photos. But
I don't know how that works, but I'm not going to even touch that.
The legalities that we can talk about during another episode. But anyway, so if you get to the point where you're very frustrated and you're not getting anywhere, take a breath. Step away from it. Talk to a friend.
Have a snooze. Have a sleep on it.
Don't try and send an email or phone the person up on your aggro, because it's not going to help anything. Right? It's just going to make things worse.
If you want to put an email together, though, I would say put it on an email and send it to your wife. That might make things worse.
I wouldn't do that. But so if you've gotten to the point where you've taken a break, you've spoken to a friend, you've just chilled a little bit, you're not getting anywhere, you can take it to a debt collector. But one thing that I would suggest before you actually take it to a debt collection agency, because most debt collection agencies will end up keeping most of the money for themselves. So it's like 40 to 80% of the actual total bill they will keep. So depending on...
look, I don't know, man. Like, I personally, I mean, you're saying about debt collectors. I mean, I've dealt with debt collectors in the past, and they're just a bunch of dogs as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's just my personal opinion. And if you're listening to this and you think definitely if you're a debt collector yourself, mate, good luck to you. But I would not, VCAT is probably the next step up.
Well, like, Dave, before you get to the debt collectors, what you do is you send a letter to a final email saying, at this stage, I haven't heard back from you. I've tried to I've made multiple attempts to contact you. I'm not sure what's going on, but at this stage, I'm no longer willing to wait any longer. Therefore, I'm going to be forwarding this case to the debt collection agency, and pick one that you're going to send it to, on this particular date if I haven't heard back from you. Right. Now, that sometimes is enough to get the ball rolling, and some people go, oh, debt collectors. Right. Yeah. So they don't want to have someone knocking on their door, and who does? Let's be honest, especially in front of your family and stuff, So that might be enough to jar the discussion, and you can then, if you don't hear from them, take it to debt collectors. Now, like I said, debt collectors do take about 40 to 80% of the total bill. So the only time you'd really want to take it to a debt collector is if you just want to be spiteful. The other way of doing it is VCAT. So VCAT will allow you to basically argue a point. There's no lawyers involved. You don't have to have legal representation. So the cost of taking it to VCAT is actually quite low. It's been a while, but I think there's a fee of about $65, I believe.
It's a fairly low fee as far as I know. It is. I never really had to take anyone into VCAT, and I hope I never will. I think you did, though, didn't you?
I did. I unfortunately, and I'll get into that story in a second, but VCAT has a fee of about $65 to process and send out the paperwork and stuff, and then they'll say to you, you need to be at our premises on this particular date to discuss the matter and mediate. Hopefully that'll resolve it. If not, they'll make a decision and the other person will be required to pay. So for $65, now, obviously, if you're only charging someone $50 for your photo shoot, you're not going to take them there for $65. But if you had like thousands of dollars invested in a photo shoot, which you spent 2 days filming and another 5 days editing, then you definitely want to take it there. And with $65 as a fee, that's actually pretty good. You don't have to get legal representation. You can just represent yourself. I don't think you actually can take legal representatives into the tribunal. But anyway, and that's one way of doing it. And I actually have gone down that path before. With one particular client I mentioned earlier on. I had a regular client for 2.5 to 3 years, and they would basically always contract me to do videos, and I would charge them a set amount for a 2-hour period. Right, so let's say we'll use a figure, $100 for 2 hours. So I'm throwing a figure out there. They rang me up and they said, "Look, we've got this really big job, and it's going to be 6 hours as opposed to 2 hours, and we need you to travel to a particular place that's like 3 times the distance." So realistically, I worked on the system of, okay, they've been happy to pay this amount for 2 hours. They're asking me to do 6 hours. I'll multiply that by 3. Right. So it wasn't anything unexpected. That was the rate that I charged. I've been charging it for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
And, they wanted me to do everything by 6 hours as opposed to 2 hours. They wanted me to travel 3 times the distance. I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And produced the video. It was actually a really nice video. To this day, I'm actually really happy with it. I keep looking at it. It's just...
It brings bad memories.
Bad memories, but the video itself was a fantastic video.
Yeah.
It was so what happened was I supplied it to the actual company, and within 2 hours, it was up on the web.
Mm-hmm.
On the website, they were promoting it overseas. This is a big company. We're talking a huge company. And they were just pumping it out. And I thought, oh, great, they loved it, And because they were regular, this was very early on. I just, basically said to them, you can pay me, within a couple of weeks. That's fine. I wasn't, thinking that there would be any issue because they're a regular customer. And time went past, didn't hear from them. I rang up and I spoke to their office and I said, oh, look, hey, how's it going? The person who I normally would speak to. And I said, look, just giving you a heads up that the amounts are outstanding at the moment. I'd appreciate if it's possible to pay it as soon as possible. That person was like, yeah, no worries, we'll pass it to you. Another week passed, hadn't heard from them, no money. Another week after that, I rang them back. I said, look, what's going on? I rang you up, you said you'd pay it. I haven't received anything as yet. So by this stage, we're looking at 3 months after the actual, the job had been done. And they were still pumping it out there. So they were selling it. Like
they're pushing it through social media, through...
Everything.
Yeah, websites, whatever. Yeah.
And it was like being sent out to government bodies. And so, yeah. And the person I spoke to said, look, I spoke to the manager and they were meant to have done it. I said, well, they haven't. Could you just remind them? So that afternoon, I get an email from the director of the company. How dare you threaten my staff?
Mind you haven't really, be honest, but you haven't actually threatened anyone.
No, I actually had a really good working relationship with the person that I spoke to. We would laugh on the phone, carry on. Yeah. I just said, look, hey, look, they might have forgotten, whatever. I'm not going to start an argument over it, especially with a client that 3 years. And so he sent me this nasty email saying that I was harassing his staff and making everyone feel uncomfortable, and he would pay when he felt like it.
Yeah, straight on the defense. Yeah.
And I wrote back to him. I said, I've met my part of the bargain. What do you mean you'll pay whenever you feel like it?
Yeah.
And he basically said, you've overcharged me. Now, something that I actually didn't add in was, even though technically I multiplied the bill by 3, I actually had given him an additional discount on top of that. So technically it was probably only about the equivalent of about 2.5. So I dropped off about 20% off the total bill.
Yeah, because it's obviously a long-term client.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got a good working relationship.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I had given him a bigger discount than what I normally would.
Yeah.
And, basically I charged him no more than I normally would, plus a discount. And he was complaining about that I charged too much. Yeah. And he said, normally you only charge us this set amount. And I'm like, that's because it's 2 hours as opposed to 6 hours, And he just...
It makes you feel better as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like you're begging for something that you're entitled to.
Yeah.
He wasn't begging for the video.
Did you actually give him a quote for that job because it's a bigger job?
Yeah, I told him.
He knew that it's not going to be...
This is the problem. I spoke to the person in reception who I always dealt with. And they were like, whatever it's going to cost, we're happy with.
Okay, there you go.
So it wasn't a written quote. And this is why it's an important thing to do.
Yeah, and you live and learn. That's the thing too, isn't it?
And I learned. And at the end of the day, he just refused to pay. And it went on for a very lengthy time. And finally, I became vindictive. That's the word for it.
Yeah. You're obviously upset.
I was. And, it wasn't just purely about the money. I was, if something had happened, I would have just, don't worry about the money. Yeah. But this person was being obnoxious, saying that I was harassing his staff. He would pay me when he...
got into personal space, in your personal space.
He'll pay me when he feels like it. Yeah. That was a huge insult, and I took it to VCAT, and I basically put in the submission, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as the paperwork went out from VCAT, the money showed up in my account the next day. Because if it does go to VCAT and they get a case against them, it gives them
against their
reputation. They've got a case against them. Their credit rating.
And it's all public too, I think.
It is public. It is. So if anyone does a search, it'll come up with this person
doesn't pay
to VCAT, doesn't pay his bills. Simple. And when you're trying to get tenders from government, that looks bad.
Yeah.
Especially for such a small amount.
Oh, yeah.
So I did get the money back, and the case didn't even have to go to VCAT.
But you lost the client.
I lost the client. Yeah. Well, kind of.
Really?
Kind of. This is where it gets funny.
Wow. Okay.
So in total, I think it took me a period of about 5 to 6 months to actually get the money. Right? So the money shows up in the account the day after the paperwork from VCAT is received. A week after that, I get a phone call from the company. Hi, Evan, how's it going?
What, the same bloke?
It wasn't the director, ironically. He had gotten the person who I normally speak to ring me up. Hey, listen, we've got another job coming up in Melbourne. And I just went, are you serious? Like,
What the hell?
Hey, that was where I used a few profanities. Are you effing serious? And the person in reception had no idea what had gone on, which is fair enough. I mean,
that's right.
And I just said, look, this has just gone through VCAT. I had to take it to VCAT before I got paid. Why would I come back and do that again?
Yeah. Well, get full payment up front.
Well, the thing is,
the scope of work changes, right, as well. So most of the time people tell you, hey, I want one video this, and then all of a sudden, but make sure you bring 2 cameras and make sure you stay for, extra 3-4 hours or whatever else. And it's just, exactly. Yeah.
And like, it's after someone's burnt you once, you don't want to go back. It's left a bitter taste in your mouth and stuff. But look, so generally speaking, that's a little bit of guidance for people out there who are starting off, or who might have been in for a while and just never bothered to figure out how to use contracts properly, and how to deal with clients, and well, hopefully some of this has actually been useful to people. I know that if someone had told me this when I first started, it would have been a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. You live and learn, man. Because I've dealt with this sort of stuff as well, and it puts really, really bad taste in your mouth. It's just simple as that. And I've had a client that has been with me for the last 2 years. He's like a media company, so they're pretty. They're not probably a huge company, but they're a small media advertising company, and they always used me for all the shoots, and always happy with all the work, and just one day, just crickets, silence. You know what I mean? And then I was just like, hey, what's going on? And then I'm actually friends with them on Facebook. I'm friends with them on try to contact them through all the social media and all that sort of stuff. Crickets, nothing. And then, one day I had to threaten them, say, hey, just to let you know, you'll be getting a letter next week from VCAT. I need my money. Simple as that. Yeah. And it wasn't $100 or $200. It was a couple of $1,000s as well. So, I mean, for a lot of people, it's probably a small amount. Yet, for us, because we obviously got small business. We all both freelancers, so a couple of $1,000, I can buy 4 drones for that. You know what I mean?
Only four. Well, look, and the same things happen to me where people have gone quiet for a lengthy period. Regular clients, and they found someone else, obviously.
Which is okay. That's
life.
Right.
Yeah, and then some of them have come back like a year later and said, "Hey, we want you to do some work." And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. Yeah. But look, at the end of the day, you want to try and keep amicable with your clients. You don't want to burn bridges because somewhere down the track they might come back. Sometimes you just don't want them to come back, as in my case previously. But at the end of the day, try and do the best that you can. Make sure that you're polite, you speak nicely to people, give them opportunities. But if it gets to the point where nothing's happening, then sometimes you just need to take that step. And hopefully it never happens to anyone out there. But if it does, now you know what to do.
Well, it's more or less what you can do, yeah. So hopefully this episode was pretty helpful. See if you do have any comments or anything like that, just
send us an email.
Let us know.
Can I send out my email today?
Sure.
So it's Evan, EVAN, at pixellife, spelled PIXELIFE.com.au.
Well, yeah, that's the,
Did you notice it's only got one L in there?
I actually did the other day, actually.
Yeah. I've actually had to register both because everyone spells them wrong, but it's a single L. But so
I think Evan took on this episode full on, head on. So he was like a big smile on his face.
Look, I believe strongly in doing the right thing by people, and also trying to have guidelines in place, contracts and stuff. If you feel that we've said anything that was wrong, or if you agreed with us, or if you want to add anything in, like if you've got a story, send us an email, and we'll be happy to hear from you.
Keep in mind this is our opinion as well. So
definitely,
it's
not legal advice.
So if you do have any of these issues, seek legal advice. So,
Yes. These are just guidelines to give you direction. But I mean, obviously, if you are going through a lot of things like that, legal advice is always recommended. And remember, at the end of the day, no matter how much you want to smack someone in the head, don't do it. Yeah.
But also, I should probably mention as well, finishing this up slowly, I think first consultation with legal advice is for free most of the time. So you can sort of just have a chat with someone, and they'll give you.
There's also legal aid as well. Legal aid,
that's right.
Yeah,
so there's a couple of other things. I get Evan to put a few things on the show notes.
But legal aid is actually available to everyone, and I mean you can have a consultation with them. So if worst comes to worst, you can give them a quick call, and they'll help you out.
And also, we're talking about Australian laws too, right?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about US, European laws or whatever else. So.
Look, I think
very similar, but
I mean they have different technicalities behind them. But yeah, look, I mean we're all in the same vein. Make sure you try and contact the person, do the right thing, don't be aggro. I mean, there's universal sort of things to
common sense prevails, hopefully.
Pretty much. Alrighty, well that's brought us to the end of this episode.
Good luck. Thanks heaps, guys. All the best.
Thank you very much. All the best from me, and catch you on the next episode. Take care, guys.